Yeah, so here's a little Catan update for you. Ended up playing a solo game by myself. The power's been off for the better part of the day. I think someone ended up hitting a line down or something. So, been doing this to entertain myself. I've played Catan solo before. I played it at school. I've also played it here at home. So it's good practice. I can't do it that often. I need to play with friends sometimes, but it's fun to play a solo game every once in a while just to test myself and, do some competition and strategy. It's actually a pretty nice way of keeping busy. Anyways, so played a solo game, 3-player game on the extension, the 5 to 6 player extension. Why? Because it's just a bigger board, it's nicer, there's more resources, and it's more competitive in nature. You don't have to worry about players getting choked off and losing the game from the start. But anyways, Orange won. They absolutely crushed it in terms of resources. As you can see down here. I mean, they basically what Orange did very early on in the game, they invested in the 6-10-5 kind of trio, and then they invested in the 8 and the 4. Those were the first few placements, and then they spread out into the ore and spread out around the wheat. The original goal for Orange was to do a wheat strategy. They did get to go first. We did a roll-off. Whoever got the highest number on the dice was the first color to go. So Orange got to go first. The key thing with Orange investing on the port right off the bat is that generally most players, they'll invest in 2 different triage sections, 2 different trios, and then they'll build out to a port afterward. The issue is that Orange, White had already done their placements since White went last. And so White invested in the 9-8-3 and then the 6-10-4 early on in the game. Orange, I had invested in the 6-5-10 since that made sense and I could build toward the 3-for-1 if someone stole the wheat port. But White, since they're invested on the 8 and the 10, they very well could build toward the wheat port if they wanted to. Which is why on my last placement for Orange, when Orange got their last placement, I just secured the port right off the bat. Since I'm already invested in the 6 and the 8, so I can get the necessary resources to account for the missing sheep resource. Outside of that, just really diversified resources overall. I mean, Orange didn't have sheep. They could have built toward the 12, but, it's 12. Why would you do that? Orange didn't have sheep, but they had the wheat port. About halfway into the game, they got the 3-for-1 port over here. And then I probably want to say 80%, 85% of the way into the game, we built over to the ore port after we were already heavily invested over here. So they had the wheat port, the ore port, and the 3-for-1 with a ton of investment specifically in wheat and ore. The only reason I got the 3-for-1 was literally because of the 4 and the 5 that were getting rolled reasonably often. But no, so yeah, we played to 13. Probably should have mentioned that earlier. Yeah, we played to 13. The reason why we play to 13 is because it's a larger board, there's more resources, and also games just go by way too quickly on 10 points with 3 people. So it's more fun to play to 13 because 13 means you have to get all of your settlements and cities on the board, or most of your settlements and cities, and then the longest road or largest army. So it's more competitive, it lasts longer, and it's just more satisfying to actually win the game, versus 10 points. Because 10 points, you can literally, you can technically win the game without getting a single city on the board if you're playing to 10 points, because all you would need to do is 5 settlements, either longest road and largest army, and then 2 or 3 victory points out of the dev cards. I've seen people who have won without building a single city. It's not often that it happens, but it can happen. This makes it so it is impossible to win without getting at least 1 city on the board. Unless you literally get all of the victory points, which, by the way, there are only 5 victory points in a dev card deck. But getting 5 victory points out of the deck, and then largest army and longest road and your 5 settlements. And that's just not realistic. That's not going to happen. That's I've never seen anyone win that way. Anyways, so yeah, and then, blue came very close to winning, so I was rooting for orange. I play all parts to the best of my ability. I root for whichever player goes first. So when we do the roll off and decide which player goes first, I root for that player. So orange went first, and then blue, and then white. Blue got very close. They were one settlement away from winning. They have their cities, which add up to 10 points. Cities and settlements add up to 10 points, and they had longest road, making it 12. So they literally only needed one settlement at that sheep port to get themselves the win, which they would have done on the next turn because they had a pretty decent chunk of change here. Not to mention whatever roll they would have gotten next. And yeah, I very much believe they would have secured the win on the next turn. But unluckily, it's just the fact that orange goes before blue in the rotation, so orange managed to get their final settlement on the board before blue. I think that orange was also kind of satisfying because they didn't have largest army or longest road or any dev cards. They won entirely just through resource management and getting all their settlements and cities on the board. And yeah, white did horribly. It's not necessarily their fault. They just, heavily invested in sheep and wheat. The 9 didn't actually get rolled that often, and when it did, they were getting blocked by the knight earlier on in the game. So they were just crippled resource-wise. Tried building to the sheep port. I considered building to the 3-for-1. I built to the 3-for-1 over here, but kind of late in the game. Tried building to the sheep port, didn't have enough resources or rolls to actually really get a settlement on the sheep port, so white was just kind of screwed. They had some stuff. They got 5 points, but, that's pretty bad in a 13-point game. Outside of that, basically all I do in a solo game, by the way, because I know most people don't play solo, it's actually pretty fun, and it's good practice, good for testing out different strategies. All you do, you set up the placards in the order, or whatever order you want. I set them up and then I rolled off. I probably should have rolled off and then set them up, but whatever. You set them up, put the pieces underneath, put the cards underneath. So, you just have each of the cards at their location. Dev cards as well at each location. And that way, and then you just use a piece. Eventually, if everyone has their cities on the board, then I would use like a quarter or a coin. And I move it from placard to placard depending on whose turn it is, so I don't lose track of whose turn it is. It's pretty straightforward after that point. Just do the normal rolls you would do. The only thing I do in a solo player game, which is slightly different, it's not majorly different. Like, it's not gonna absolutely destroy the balancing of the game, is sevens. So the robber is still active. When you roll a 7, just like you normally would, you get rid of half your cards if you have more than 7 cards, rounding down. So if you have 8 cards, you get rid of 4. If you have 9, you get rid of 4. If you have 10, you get rid of 5. Onwards and onwards. And so basically, the only thing I changed is the robber, while it cuts players off from resources, you don't steal a resource. Because I've played previously where I do the resource stealing in a solo game, and all I did is I would shuffle the cards and kind of imagine myself in that scenario of which player is most likely to, be a threat in the long run. But the problem with playing solo is that you know what everyone has. So there is a certain level of internal bias going into trying to steal from someone, which is why I just straight up don't worry about that. The critical thing about the robber in the first place is the fact that you block off someone's resource. The robbery is 1 card, and that's not going to matter in the grand scheme of things. So, so no stealing, just kind of blockading resources. It's a really good game. I mean, the average solo game is probably about, I want to say, an hour to an hour and a half, 3-player. 2-player is a bit boring. I've done 2-player solo games. They're just not really that interesting. 3-player is more fun. Also 3-player, even though you don't really engage in trades often, I mean, newer players do, but experienced players don't really engage in trades too terribly often with other players. You usually invest in a port early on. If you do decide to invest in a trade, if a trade makes sense, then 3 players opens up the ground for that to be more reliable in nature. But yeah, no, really enjoy it. Catan's fun. It's one of my favorite board games. Yeah, and good on Orange. Good game. The ending tally was 13, 12, 10. Orange 13, blue 12, white 10. No, 13, 12, sorry. Correction, 13, 12, 5. Yeah, no, white did not have 10 points. My gosh. No, 13, 12, 5. Orange had 13, blue had 12, white had 5. White sucks. Orange is the best. Blue came close. GG.